All right. I think we're live. Yes, and we're live. So I'm gonna live stream tonight because I managed to. Hi Enzo. Managed to recover my live streaming ability. Hi GW. I don't know why. As I've said many times, I'm not the most technically proficient person here. I think Nate's referring to himself. Yeah, I think I was able to live stream. There was just something wrong with the parameters. For those of you, certain boxes where you can you check off whether or not the video is intended for children or a general audience. I think if it's a kids video, they can't use advertising. So uh, you basically have to restrict your video to certain certain people if you want to upload to YouTube these days. And you have certain boxes, and it goes all the way down after you check them off to basically take a freeze frame, a snapshot, and then start live streaming like I am now. And for some reason, I wasn't able to scroll through those boxes. The rectangular window was cut off, so I couldn't scroll down, and therefore I couldn't advance to the point where I would be able to live stream. Again, I have no idea why this is. I have no. I don't even have the slightest clue why the window would be cut off. It may have been something that I did, to be honest, because I do all sort of my my ability to use the internet. For those of you who don't remember the last live stream, when I was able to finally recover the video, I just accidentally punched the button F8, which uh, which takes away the webcam. So you're basically a blank um, a blank sheet. There's no visual. And again, I'm not even good at explaining why I'm technically limited. So I'll get on to more interesting subjects. Uh, the ranch is making me. Nobody's allowed within 50 feet. Hi, Tim. Yeah, ad. There are some admins. None here, to the best of my knowledge, but there are some admins that are just drunk with power, and they like to exercise it very arbitrarily. For once, it's like it's like those people who get invested with a small amount of power that they don't exercise in their daily lives, and they just become drunk with the authority. So they just they just start exercising it willy nilly and in a very capricious manner. Adam Carolla had a riff about this in his book. And for those of you who haven't read Adam Carolla's first book, In 50 Years We'll All Be Chicks, it's very relevant today, and it's also a great. It's sort of, I would actually classify it as a self-help book, even though the intent is comedic. It does impart a lot of good life lessons, and it divides the chapters into little bite-sized nuggets of wisdom. And there's one chapter that's entitled "We've Made a Gilded Cage of Minimum Wage," and it's essentially this jeremiad against these small customer service representatives who have not so much cashiers or people you interact with, but people who have authority in some way. So the type of person that's put in charge of letting people into a building, the security guards that are hired, or the person that's hired at a um, the person that you speak to when your truck is towed. And he has a great story about this. But the chapter itself is basically a long rant against these people these petty tyrants who don't exercise a lot of power in their regular lives, but the fact that they're given power in this very narrow window, this little niche, just drives them drives them power mad, so they can deny someone access to their car or access to a building and frustrate their day, and they glory in that. And it's sort of an illustration of the axiom absolute power corrupts. Lord Acton has that famous quote, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So these people are not able to exercise the same power as an act to forcibly detain people. They're not even allowed to exercise the intermediate power that you would get if you were a police officer, say, but they're allowed to simply retard the progress of your day. So I think a lot of mods on YouTube have that power, particularly not so much channels like this, but you have these popular channels. Like I'm a mod on X17 Apologetics, which is the most popular apologetics YouTube channel, and the mods there, for the most part, almost all of them, even I don't know, is Nate a mod? Yeah. But the mods there are pretty reasonable for the most part. Even me. Where you have thousands of people watching the videos each day, there are times where you encounter at least one mod who just likes to go overboard on some sort of power trip, and those people usually have some sort of deficiency in their personal or professional lives that they're trying to overcompensate for. Anyway, that was a long tangent about nothing much. I guess I'm just saying, the people who do have moderating privileges, they should they should keep that in mind. What's the saying? Well, I mean that's a biblical principle. This idea, God is the one who appoints people to power. He makes rulers, and this is something you see throughout the Bible with people like whether it's Nebuchadnezzar or his son Belshazzar, or Cyrus, Pilate, Herod. Regardless of what temporal ruler there is, God is the one who invests them with power and can remove them. So I think you have to be mindful of that whenever you do acquire some sort of authority over other people. But anyway, it's 9 minutes in, so it's probably about time that I get onto the main topic instead of focusing on this ephemera. And I just wanted to give a couple of thoughts about the election. I know I see people already discussing the one of the things, and George Washington, see, this is the problem, Nate. You're so you're so confident in your authority. You're just lobbing you're lobbing insults in the middle of, but it's true, there aren't that many people watching. Whether 14 or 15, I don't even know how many people are watching right now. There oh, seven. Okay, so about half that. Um, but yeah, feel free to share this if you know anyone who likes unstructured meandering rants that where it takes 10 minutes to get to the main topic. Feel free to share this on social media, on Twitter or Facebook. I actually will be doing slightly more structured videos going forward in the future. I actually want to talk about, and I might touch on this, I actually want to talk about is an encounter I had on Facebook that was kind of interesting, which illustrates the sort of perilous times that are ahead. I think we're going to have to resort soon to setting up our own samizdat, that that illegal kind of black market form of information that the Soviets established in the during the Brezhnev. So you had the official news, and you had very little functional dissidence on a national or even a local level. It by the 70s, people had become thoroughly disillusioned with communism, but they had sort of resigned themselves to it. They had been living in a communist dictatorship for 50 years. The promises of wealth and comfort had never been realized, and people realized inchoately how much they had been lied to. But by that point, the system had suffused the psyche of the country so much that you didn't really need a hardcore apparatus. You didn't need gulags to warehouse people population. So you had one or two very prominent dissidents like Alexander Solzhenitsyn or Andrei Sakharov, but they were able to be isolated, or in Solzhenitsyn's case, he was actually able to be exiled. So you could pick apart certain people and then silo them so that they didn't infect the rest of the population. You didn't need to launch massive crackdowns because that dissident nature had been beaten out of the Russian population in the within the Soviet Union. And I think that's something that you're going to see the need for alternative ways of expressing dissent, even though right now you have a huge portion of the population that we're on board with these tech gurus, these tech censors. It refuses to get on board with the dying legacy media, which is trying to reassert control. And the deplatforming campaigns you saw in places like Google, I believe it or not, I think samizdat is the name of a website. I don't know if it's still around, but there used to be a blog by that name, which was, I forget if it was Da Tech Guy, but there were a couple of prominent bloggers. There were a couple of prominent bloggers that actually used that platform, samizdat, which was a kind of a conservative weblog. Yeah, the wrenched and the unwrenched, it's kind of a tale of two cities, the haves and the have-nots. That do not, one or two people that do not have wrenches, I think, who are not in the chat, but probably watching. But I think it's going to be like that. You're going to need alternative centers of information and distribution platforms, because I think President Trump's Twitter, assuming going forward that he was not reelected, that Biden is going to, I think his Twitter is going to disappear. Just like the Donald subreddit disappeared before the election. And on that point, it's interesting to see the other platforms adopting Reddit's policy, because Facebook, I don't know, for those of you who use, requiring that post to private Facebook groups. Now, these aren't public Facebook groups. These aren't Facebook groups that are accessible to the general public. They're requiring pre-approval from administrators at Facebook. Or now, I don't know if this is if this is if this is done done by humans, or if this is automated. I don't know exactly what they're doing, but uh, they're basically requiring that posts made to private Facebook groups. Say you have a private group supporting Donald Trump, or a private group calling for a recount in the Michigan Senate race, or a private group that is about Muslims, whatever. Say you have a private group like that. Now, what they're doing is requiring the post to that group, which no one outside of the group sees, to be approved by Facebook, which is it's going mute for you to. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know if anyone else is having problems. Just mention that in the chat. I think these headphones are still working from what I gather. So, but if the sound isn't coming through, just make a note of that. All right. Let me try it without the headphones. Let me. Okay, so I'll try it without the headphones just to see if that makes it more. I don't have the best rig, to be honest. This like, you're not getting top quality production by watching this channel. So I appreciate the people that are dedicated, who watch this channel, obviously for other reasons, which I think are generally more important than high quality production values, because you're obviously not getting that from from my YouTube channel. I think that's one of the distinctions you see on YouTube, and a lot of very envious, bitter bread tubers have pointed this out. BreadTube and the Marxist far left side of YouTube invests a lot of money in theatrics and visually or aesthetically appealing videos. They obviously edit their videos, which I do not. So they have good editing equipment and good production values, and they invest all of this in making their ideas seem somewhat palatable. Because if you have terrible ideas, the cheap way of conveying them and getting people to accept them, the cheap way is simply to put a nice polish on the terrible ideas, instead of actually examining yourself and reformulating them so that they have more appeal. It's a lot easier to just aesthetically polish terrible ideas than to go back to the drawing board and reformulate your. I think we know that by now, Nate. But you see that a lot in BreadTube, and I think that's one of the main distinctions between, and it's one of the reasons you see a lot of the deplatforming on YouTube, and so many popular conservative YouTubers go the way of well, every other every other animal that's hunted to extinction. They're they're just because the legacy media, these people, these organizations, these media organs like NBC, ABC, CNN, they invest a lot of money in order to get promoted on this platform, and they don't like independent content creators, particularly ones that try to wean people off, try to try to make transparent how much they're being lied to. They don't like those people to be successful. So instead of actually trying to compete in the marketplace of ideas by refining their philosophy, by presenting ideas that are actually appealing to a mass public, what they do is use Susan Wojcicki and the people in charge of these platforms in order to these counter these counter arguments to crush dissent, essentially. So that's what you see happening, and I think it's just going to accelerate moving forward, particularly after this election, based on the results of this election. Even though you can't really say that the victors, and I put that in quotes, the people that quote unquote won, you can't say that they have any sort of mandate, even assuming the legitimacy of the results, which I do not. You can't credit them with a mandate. But they're going to pretend that they have one in order to simply cull dissenting opinion, and particularly opinion that criticizes the censorship regime. Facebook and Twitter, they're just going to go on a rampage, and Twitter has already made that known, in Facebook and YouTube. In fact, David Wood was talking about this in his stream with John LeCrae, aka What Do You Meme? He was talking about this on their late night stream the other day. The fact that his channel just received a strike. This is after a week of uploading videos highlighting all of the depravities that have been committed in the name of Islam under the auspices of the Prophet Muhammad, in Bangladesh, in France, where women and priests and pastors continue to be beheaded and murdered. In Bangladesh, in Afghanistan, where the Taliban recently murdered several dozen people, which is not an uncommon phenomenon. So, after a week of highlighting the depravity of Islam and its practitioners, people who actually believe in the tenets espoused by Muhammad and his followers, he got suspended from YouTube, so he can't upload YouTube videos for I don't know what the actual extent of it is. It might be a week or a month. I'm not positive. But basically, he can't upload videos now, so he has to join other channels like John LeCrae or Vocab Malone. Vocab Malone was another one. His channel was demonetized. Now, whether of because of complaints from the Black Hebrew Israelites, or whether, like Act 17 apologetics, it was also a victim of Muslim paranoia, which is justified to a certain extent, considering how many people are leaving their religion. Regardless of who did it, he was also the victim of censorship, in a sense. Just another channel it's being attacked because of the espousal of a certain viewpoint that contradicts what the people in charge of YouTube believe. And I can point to myself on Facebook, and I'm sure this is a shared. Actually flagged one of my posts because I used the word Muslim. Believe it or not, I was in the post. I was trying, and this also was a private Facebook group. I explained how why it's so hard to witness to Muslims and evangelize Muslims, and I tried to explain how one of the main impediments is the fact that Muslims haven't read their ostensible ostensibly holy texts. So they haven't read the Quran, they haven't read the Ahadith, they're not familiar with the Sunnah, and they're not familiar with the Sirat. So they have no idea who Muhammad really was. They're basically imbibing second and third hand information from imams is predicated upon extolling the virtues of Muhammad. So you have them basically just passively ingesting all of these things, all of these praises and paeans to Muhammad and to Islam and the Quran, and they're not actually going to the books themselves to discover who Muhammad really was or what the principles of Islam are. So that was my point in the post, and I used the word Muslim, and someone at Facebook, maybe it wasn't even a person. Who knows these days? Maybe it was an algorithm. It flagged my, and it said you were the only person who would be able to see this. So of course I screenshotted it. I screenshotted the post and the warning and posted it to the same group. But my point is, it's it's kind of insane the the point we've reached as a society in terms of the internet, what the internet began as, the World Wide Web, what the World Wide Web began as, which was this platform for free and vigorous exchange, and it's become a tool of marginalizing ideas and truth that that reflects badly on uh that reflects badly on what social engineers are trying to implant in the populace. The ideas that the people in charge of our society are brainwash the public with. And it's kind of disturbing, but I think that's what you're going to see as the days go on. In terms of the election itself, and I know I'm almost a half hour in, and I haven't really gotten to the nuts and bolts of this. I haven't really gotten to the nuts and bolts of the election, so I'll try to keep this brief. Tom mentioned the 7 million votes. Yeah, there are a number of discrepancies here, and I think a lot of people are focused on the mechanics of how electoral fraud took place, and that is an important issue because you can't simply have someone conceptualize stealing an election. And there are historical examples of this from the election of 1960, which Richard Nixon was the legitimate winner, but Richard Daley, who ran the Democratic machine in Chicago, and Lyndon Johnson, who ran Texas politics. JFK probably lost both states in addition to some others. I forget if it was Hawaii, but there was another. But he basically lost enough states to give the Electoral College to Richard Nixon. But because the voting was overseen by Democratic operatives, and there was no Republican presence in these areas to push back, he had the election purloined from him. And this is what happens when you have elections that are permeated by fraud. And the thing is, even today, no, with the exception of someone who's involved in this cult of personality deifying JFK, like Michael Beschloss or Doris Kearns Goodwin, with the exception of these people, most people from the right to the left will all agree that the 1960 election was not legitimate in the sense of the person receiving the most electoral votes winning. So most people, and even most legitimate historians, will tell you that the 1960 election was tainted, regardless of whether they're liberal, conservative, centrist. And that was something that took place 60 years ago, so over half a century ago. And we've now arrived at a point where most honest people are willing to admit that it was stolen from Richard Nixon. So the fact that you have the dominant media narrative being that Trump lost in a legitimate election, to me, it's not really persuasive. It's not persuasive at all. And in the future, uh, you have people questioning this narrative. The fact that half of the country already does not accept it bodes well, because when you look at past big deception campaigns, whether it's in the run up to the Iraq War or or less catastrophically, but still equally um, offensively, the attacks on Brett Kavanaugh. You see the public generally not accepting this sort of conditioning, this idea that they just have to accept whatever the press tells them to. But that aspect, the mechanics, like I said, it's important to, but because you can't just have conceptually an idea of how to rig an election. You need operatives on the ground, and you need people um, to do that, to stuff ballots, to register dead people, register people who, or not register dead people, but use people on the voting rolls who aren't there legitimately. You need this. You need manpower, in other words, in order to affect this. Because if you just have a plan saying, I want to swing Pennsylvania or Michigan or Arizona or Georgia to Joe Biden, if you just have a plan but you have no way to effectuate that, then it doesn't matter. It's simply it's just in your head and it remains there. So the mechanics are important in terms of explaining how this was done, but I don't think they're key to this. And I think you need to understand this from just uh, at a granular level, but also the, um, but also just in order to explain to people who are skeptical how this operates. So I haven't looked at the final results. So it's been a couple of days since the election. So I'm basing this off of just the initial tallies and what I observed on election night. So you have basically the scenario that was outlined as far-fetched scenario by the media in order to downplay President Trump's chances of being reelected. This idea of late voters all swarming to Trump. That's actually what turned out to be true. So you have 3/4 or so of voters on election day voting for Trump, and a corresponding but slightly higher portion of absentee ballots coming in for Joe Biden. Now, in order to understand how unusual this was, you have to think of it this way. There are these gerrymandered congressional districts. You have districts that are gerrymandered, some of them intended to be majority minority, although there are few of those after a series of Supreme Court decisions saying that these were discriminatory. But you still have you still have a large amount of majority minority districts, African American or Hispanic, non-white, in other words. You also have districts that are majority, i.e., predominantly white, but are are structured to represent a certain party. So in New York City, you have a couple of these like Gerald Nadler's district, where you have a huge group of people, you have a small number, maybe a quarter or so of conservatives, or people who would be likely to vote for the Republican candidate. So Hasidic or Orthodox Jews, ethnic whites, Italians, and then you have a large number, the vast majority who support the Democrats. So African, not African Americans, but you have secular service union workers, and so on. You know, hipsters who are transplants here from the Midwest who belong to Antifa. You have like all these people grouped together. Yeah, well, not Staten Island. I think he has a part of Brooklyn though, Dyker Heights, or not Dyker Heights, but he did have a portion of Brooklyn that was very conservative. So you have this dynamic where you have a lot of people who vote for the Democrats and a small number that vote for the Republicans, and this repeats itself across the U.S. You have districts that are, you know, maybe 10% WASP and 5% evangelical Christian, and then you have 85% liberal mainline Protestant, or 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 just very far left in their politics for some reason, and and the results reflect those ratios, and and you don't see Republicans criticizing the results in these districts because they realize that there's nothing nefarious at foot. You just need to observe Occam's razor. The simplest solution is usually the correct one. So, you know, if Gerald Nadler gets 75% of the vote, he did so via voter fraud. And you have the same thing in some minority majority districts like Kwesi and Fume in Baltimore. He defeated a conservative black woman by, I think, 70 something percent, and she garnered about a quarter of the vote. No one's alleging that he stole the election, even though there might have been malfeasance, people who voted who shouldn't have. It was a minuscule factor. So that's why you don't see Republicans, I don't know, maybe some members of Q are, but like most mainstream Republicans and conservatives are not alleging that these districts have been, that the elections in these districts have been rigged, because the results are expected. There's nothing unusual about them. There's nothing unusual about an overwhelmingly Democratic district electing a very liberal Democrat. But when you have something nationally, and this was the case in these states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, you have districts that have more or less the same composition, that are majority white with a significant minority population, but not that large. You have a pool of absentee ballots from the entire state, not just urban hardcore areas. You have the entire state going overwhelmingly for Joe Biden in these absentee ballots. Now, if it was simply a large majority that corresponded to the amount of people voting for Trump on election day, say, okay, 70 to 75% of the vote, or 60 to 75%, 60 to 70%, or even like 72, 73, 74% of the vote, you could say, oh, well, you know, that's it's simply a dichotomy. You know, Trump voters voted on election day, and the the absentee voters voted for Biden because they didn't want to go into the polling place. They were afraid of COVID or something. You could say, oh, well, maybe that's the case. But when you have states like this, again, the ballots coming in not just from Philadelphia or Detroit or these urban areas that are very overwhelmingly Democratic, but the entire state. And you say, okay, these absentee ballots are not simply, you know, 60% or 3/4 in favor of Biden, which you could accept if you accepted the premise that absentee ballots would pro Biden in a pro Biden in the same way that election day ballots would be pro Trump. You could say, oh, well, yes, Biden has a sizable lead, but it corresponds to what happened for Trump on election day. You could say, oh, well, Biden got 60 or 70 or even 75% of the vote through these ballots. But when you look at the results and results that hold true throughout the country, even in states that are very conservative, like Arizona, for example, or Maricopa County, Arizona, and you say, okay, not only did he get 67% or 70% or even 75%, but 80 to 90% in favor of these absentee ballots being returned, not simply from the urban core of cities like Philadelphia, but the entire state. So you're telling me that every person or almost every single person who decided to send in an absentee ballot was in favor of Biden. Okay, you could accept most absentee voters being Biden, even a large majority being pro Biden, but to say that 80% of them, 8 out of 10 absentee ballots that were sent were going to be Biden, it simply defies credulity. You would have to accept the notion that no Trump voters, despite the fact that he had a large number of elderly supporters as well as middle-aged supporters, you would have to say that no elderly Trump supporter wanted to send in an absentee ballot. You would essentially have to accept premises that are not logical. Yeah, there was a swing in the Hispanic vote, and a lot of someone pointed this out on that this is the map you would expect if the Republican Party gained 10 to 20% voter support among minorities and lost 4 to 5% among whites, which is what, if you accept these numbers as legitimate, is what happened. I think it's a good point, but again, I think it's predicated on the idea that these are legitimate numbers, which I don't believe. And now another point I just like to bring up is that the people accusing Republicans of engaging in conspiracy theories are the same people that pushed forward the most incredulous with absurd conspiracy theory for the past 4 years, which was that Russia placed Donald Trump in the White House. They did this by running for the law, running almost entirely ineffective Hillary Clinton, an historically unpopular candidate. Yeah, he lost ground in suburban areas, but that was what was expected. So the people who propounded the most ridiculous conspiracy devised by literal CIA heads want you to accept the idea that questioning a result that was determined by voter fraud or vote fraud, whether that's simply out of bounds, which is absurd. It's not. It's not. Again, you had counties that refused to count ballots in before midnight. In Philadelphia, they stopped counting, and they all coincidentally stopped counting when Trump was in the lead, and when they were miraculous infusion of votes. And it's simply the people alleging that this is a conspiracy want you to believe that that electoral fraud does not happen, which again contradicts numerous examples. Not just the Nixon JFK race is the most famous example, but you could go to the Bob Dornan congressional reelection where he lost by less than 1,000 votes to Loretta Sanchez, a former congresswoman who ran against Kamala Harris. So you have the Dornan race where they found more, where the margin of victory was less than the number of ballots cast by illegal aliens who weren't eligible to vote. So you have that. you have the 5 congressional races during the 1980s. I think one of them was in Indiana, where they documented the races were essentially stolen. Now, someone on my Twitter timeline was getting into a debate, a very vociferous argument with me, saying, "Well, you're saying Republicans don't cheat," and that was not my point at all. My point wasn't that Republicans cheat. My point was Democrats are the only ones. Democratic officials are the only ones with the power to alter the vote in places like Philadelphia or Baltimore, Detroit. They're the only ones with the capacity. Now, if there were Republican political machines in charge of key swing states, then yeah, you could definitely make the argument that they had have the potential to steal elections. The problem is there aren't. There wasn't a Republican attorney general in charge of Pennsylvania who said Joe Biden is going to win this. He essentially guaranteed that Joe Biden was going to win, and this is the chief law enforcement officer of the state. There's so much, not only circumstantial evidence, but tangible admissions that you could cite. And I'll wrap this up because it's getting to be a long video, but one of the things I hope comes about as a result of the election is that President Trump actually litigates this. The chances of him actually overturning the result or a court hearing these complaints and then invalidating specific states are slim to nil, in all honesty. But one of the things that could happen is that since Trump still has control of the RNC, he still has control of the Republican machinery, and their money is at his disposal. Even if he doesn't have control of the government, he has control of how Republicans pursue this, and therefore he can actually litigate this, which is something that Richard Nixon did not do. He could bring this before judges and collect evidence to illustrate voter fraud, essentially. And he has 2 months or so to do that, within which to do that. So, yeah, Tammany Hall, back to the agent. Yeah, so it's a long tradition. The idea, this, a large part of it is gaslighting, but I'm sure ordinary Democratic voters really are ignorant of the extent of electoral malfeasance and fraud. But yes, there's a long history of elections, and even very consequential elections, like the presidency presidential election being stolen. And one of the things I hope happens is that he actually litigates this, regardless of being inaugurated. I think that would be a fitting legacy for him, because this is something that Nixon did not do. He sort of lied down and didn't pursue it because he was afraid it would divide the country during the Cold War. We're already divided. There's no way that this could get worse from a political perspective. So I hope this is something that he pursues vigorously. Maybe he will pull out a win. Like my pastor said, we should pray for the truth to be revealed. So regardless of who emerges from this in the Oval Office, I think that's something that if you're a believer, yeah, you should definitely pray for the truth to be revealed, because the media and the people in charge are certainly not going to agitate for that outcome. Anyway, under 15 minutes. And I'm not sure if the next video will be on the election. It depends if there's some amazing development, perhaps, but I doubt it. But thanks, everyone. Christine, Chicago, GW, of course, First Corinthians, Alejandro, Tim, Enzo, Inky, and even Nate. Thank you for coming, and feel free to share this. I know it's an insanely long video, but you know, just feel free to share this for those of you who have not been deplatformed yet. Anyway, see you later.